And I'll tell you when it's up. Okay, it's up on YouTube now.
You want to start us off, or you want me to?
Yeah, let me start us off, but I have to correct something about my sound. I'm sorry about that.
That's fine.
Let's see. Okay, okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our summer program on the Tarot as a Roadmap for Life. And Nick Lawrence is doing the interactions of the major arcana in this 2-week period, or in this 7 or 8 week period. And so I'm going to turn it over to Nick at this point. And thank you, Nick, for being here and doing this. I very much appreciate it. I will be back online at the end of the program. So
okay, great.
See you then.
All right, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Before we launch into this evening's presentation, I do believe that Gilda Ko, who gave a presentation last week, has one detail for the record that she would like to clear up. So we'll give her the floor.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to make a correction with reference to the Fool wearing shoes. And I mentioned that he wasn't wearing shoes. In some cards, he isn't in that whole tarot deck, but in others, he actually wears all kinds of shoes, pointy shoes, even mid-calf boots, sometimes slip-ons, and other times his toes are out and the heel. So it was actually quite advanced, the shoe manufacturing at that time. So if you could please make that correction, that would be great.
And was that a point that you made in your presentation that you're just now wanting to clear up?
Yes, because Marilyn had asked in the Hierophant, where the Fool is kneeling, he takes off his hat and he's not wearing any shoes. Mm-hmm. And then I suppose I had a mind object about all of the saints that don't wear shoes throughout their life. And so I had a few cards in front of me and they didn't have shoes, but in reality, there's a lot of them that do. So I said, oh, yes, he's not wearing shoes throughout the whole venture, but he actually is. And he not only is he wearing shoes, he's wearing all kinds of styles of shoes. So including toes out. And so the shoes actually are a dynamic line of not wearing shoes, or toes and heel off. Is actually an added dynamic line of where he's at in the particular card. So Marilyn mentioned that when they, come in front of the Pope, that, the no shoes and off with the hat was a sign of respect.
I see.
Sacred respect. But throughout the deck, they are all kinds of varieties of having to do with the shoes. And even when toes are out, shoes are broken. See, here they have. And sometimes sometimes even he wears only one shoe, and then in the other foot he's barefooted. So it's actually a theme to look into, a detail. See, that's all over. It's all around. It's actually a detail. Almost a personality. And also the creator of the deck has a spread that he uses 7 cards, and he starts the feet. So it's the feet, the thighs, the belly, the heart center, and then the head. There's 7, and the feet feature. So there is probably an attention to the footwear that the Fool carries on throughout the deck. That's actually something quite interesting and unusual.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for clearing that up.
Yes.
I hope everybody is able to reference that with the images that we've now put on the screen.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, we will now go forward with this week's presentation. Okay, so let me get everything set up here and we will begin. Okay, everyone can see this? Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to call this Tarot Permutations yet again, the High Priestess and Hierophant. And we're keeping with the same theme that we've had for the past several weeks of just comparing cards and kind of considering whether or not they create harmony or disharmony when paired with one another. And I also want to preface this presentation with saying that some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm going to be painting in very broad strokes, given the limitations of time and the particular format. I don't think that I'll be able to go into as fine of detail as I would like to on some of the topics. So I just ask that you bear with me. Keep in mind that I will have to inevitably paint in very broad strokes, at least for part of the presentation. And then towards the end, we can hopefully tie up some of those loose ends. Okay. All right, so the methods of comparison that I use for the cards, which we will discuss this evening, I used the topographical method, the numerological method, and the dialectical method. And if you'd like some more basic information on these methods of comparison, you can reference back to, I think, the first video in this series. I gave a presentation just breaking down some of the basic ideas for how one might compare the cards. So the topographical method, looking at the placement and similarity of the locations in each of the cards, we arrive at the comparison of the High Priestess and the Hierophant. In each card, the figures are seated on a throne in a temple-like setting, but each with differences that contribute to their separate meanings. The numerological method, I will give an explanation along these lines at a later point as it relates to this presentation specifically, but to kind of give you the theory, it's an idea of reducing cards that go past the digit 9 back to their digits within 0 through 9 or 1 through 9. So if you take a card like 16 and you do 1 plus 6, it then gives you 7, and we posit a relationship between 7 and 16. Okay, and then the dialectical method, the first two cards tonight, I will present. I have some strange wording here, but essentially what I'm trying to convey is that the first two cards in the presentation tonight create an antithesis with one another, and then later I will present a card that hopefully resolves that dissonance. Okay, so the exploration of a theme. As with all previous comparisons, we are using the cards to consider the relationship born out of two or more cards when paired with one another. The theme we will explore via the chosen cards this evening is that of inner and outer religion and their relationship to one another. Okay. So just quickly going to define my terms as much as I can. Okay. In order to quickly define terms and move forward, when I use the term inner religion, what is meant is a felt sense of religiosity that is personal and explored in private, independent of a larger religious organization. When using the term outer religion, I mean the experience of religion which is popular and widespread, usually involves a large organization, relies upon individual proponents seeking religious guidance from an external authority figure, puts forth dogma and laws, and operates in part as an appendage of the state. So I'm trying to just set up a relationship between inner and outer religion, or you could easily interchange the words subjective and objective religion or something like that. So it is worth noting that while these two are easily acknowledged, they are usually understood as being in opposition to one another, as one poses a threat to the very existence of the other in both cases. Okay. So now moving to the cards. So we have the High Priestess on the left and the Hierophant on the right. And as you can see, their background is pretty similar, at least in the elements that are there. I mean, they're quite different at the same time, but both nonetheless seated in something approximating a temple. And both seem to be holy figures. So the High Priestess, seated in the inner temple of the invisible and intelligible world, the inner religion. The Hierophant is seated in the outer temple of the visible world, the outer religion, or the realm of outer religion. Okay. So, any comments, questions, anything of that sort so far? No huge objections.
Yeah, I would just like to add that besides the word outer religion and inner religion, that sacred, there's something sacred about the relationship, whether it's inner or outer, that there's something sacred about it.
Yeah, certainly. I think the language will probably cause more problems or blowback rather than the idea that I'm hoping to express. And I really want to hear what you all have to say as we go forward with this. I'm hoping that this presentation will be slightly more conversational, because it's definitely something that involves everybody, as far as I can see.
Nick, just hold on a second. I think there's a question in the YouTube chat, but I think it's for Gilda.
Yeah.
So I think it's better for us to do it now instead of later. Yeah. It is said, like, what is the significance of one shoe? Assad al-Din asked.
What is the significance of what?
One shoe.
Oh, wearing one shoe and not another?
Yeah.
Well, it can be interpreted as he's split and he's trying to be in both worlds at the same time. One is a bit more hapless, and the other one is already incorporated into the organization or the better, the well-to-do that are moving around already fully clothed. Mm-hmm. So it creates, he's trying to walk at the same time. He's got one foot there that he's trying to find his inner life, let's say, as Nick has presented, and the other one is the outer life. So he's not cohesive yet. He's got one foot on both worlds, one of each world, the inner and the outer. So, and it seems that when it's not wearing a shoe on one foot, that is the inner world, because the outer world has a lot of rules and regulations, so it's already manifested, it's already there. So the other one is the one that he's struggling with, and that would be where he's not wearing a shoe. And he even wears high knee boots. I mean, it's really a fashion show of shoes. So, and sometimes the toe is extremely long. So there's pictorially dynamic relationships that help us identify what the particular fool is going through, inner and outer, as Nicholas has mentioned.
Thank you. Assad already said thank you as well.
Cool. Yeah, and it's also, you know, as you're kind of pointing out this inner and outer life, I'm just thinking it might be helpful and somewhat meaningful to think of religion not only as a noun, but possibly as a verb as well, rather something that we do. Okay, so moving into the High Priestess card. The High Priestess, advocate of inner religion. The high priestess is seated within a temple not found in the outer world. The receptive and feminine experience of the womb-like temple in which the high priestess is seated is one of knowing, gnosis, individual experience, and personal access. It is a religion of one's own, which recognizes the good inherent in every man's longing for the religious dimension of life, and holds fast to no one person's social creed, nationality, or ethnicity. All religions are based upon religious experiences had by the religion's prophets, and it is from these experiences that the external modes of the religion are extrapolated and codified. So, in almost every case, the religions which have their existence largely in the external world are based solely upon the experience of inner religion and religious experience, which is the interior realm of the high priestess. Notice that the high priestess holds the scroll of the Torah, which is the law of God as revealed to Moses. So why would the high priestess hold this scroll of the law? This seems to say that the foundation of external law that will later be dispensed to the people rests upon the inner realm which the high priestess dwells in, the temple not made of human hands, and which lives in the heart and mind of every man. And again, as I've said before, I just use man generically to mean all people. So it's worth asking, have you ever seen a female priest? Of course, it is not to say that females are unworthy of priesthood, but who other than Mary plays a larger feminine role in the divine unfoldment? And who other than Mary has been most understood as a challenge to the church and the church's authority? And I just include that because it was occurring to me, and there's another point in this that I couldn't include in my presentation, but it seems like it's a very easily overlooked detail that the word priestess is in the tarot deck, but I couldn't think of any external priestess that I'm aware of, and maybe somebody is, but I just think that that's a detail that's kind of slides under the rug.
External priestess, you mean like Teresa of Avila or something like that?
Well, I don't know very well who that is, but I'm curious, was she a priest or a priestess? I'm sorry.
No, she was a nun. And
Okay.
so what I would imagine that we're trying here to grip with is that she was under priests, male priests, and was not necessarily acknowledged as an authority figure, even though she did a lot of writing and was obviously connected to some reality that most weren't. And so in that sense, it's absolutely correct. They were not acknowledged. They didn't have a word that is part of the law that's external, in which allowed the female to have a authoritative position of either teacher or something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's certainly true that for all intents and purposes, she probably was a priestess, but the nomenclature probably was more along the lines of nun or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's certainly several what we now think of, I guess, as female mystics like Hildegard of Bingen or Marguerite Porete or something like that. But then again, we don't often refer to them as priestesses, but rather as mystics or something like that.
And the word nun is extremely loaded because the history of it is really impressive. So.
Well, there is, yeah, and the character in the High Priestess card. I mean, I've said this before, but I haven't tried to fully drive home the point that I was trying to make. But it's kind of wrapped up in the Hebrew language. But I mean, she very much looks like a nun.
Yeah.
And also, it's very interesting that that Mary was the mother of Christ, and Christ is also symbolized as being a fish. So in this case, the high priestess kind of looks like a nun, and also the Hebrew letter nun or noon means fish.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so moving to the Hierophant. The advocate of outer religion. The Hierophant is a priestly or pope-like figure, someone to whom people turn when religious guidance or advice is needed, but ultimately someone who has drawn a veil over the religious truths to which he owes his existence. The mechanism by which his position is established is threatened by the inner experience of religion. By nature of his position, people turn to him for help as an external religious authority, seeking outside of themselves what all men have access to within themselves. Rather than connecting with the inner religion, which all have access to, the Hierophant gives sound advice based on rules, laws, dogma, etc. He is a purveyor of faith and acceptance without knowledge or experience, rule without reason. By establishing himself as the face of God on earth, all who turn to him will turn to him again and again, and never turn inward on and into themselves, seeking their own experience. The same turning inward and into oneself has a curious corollary in Greek language in the word U.S.C, which means essence, but also a turning about or returning the mind upon itself, and is often used by Plato. With no difficulty at all, one can imagine Plato wanting to express a similar sentiment as the one above, saying, "Turn not toward myself, a mortal man, but turn your mind upon itself and contemplate the nature of the one, the good, and its relationship to the visible world." And this is clearly antithetical to the position the Hierophant holds as the visible surrogate of the one and the good on earth, saying, "Look to me, but not beyond me to seek your own vision." So again, very broad strokes here. And, I later kind of more or less baked an apology into this for this perhaps being too scathing for, priestly figures. But at the same time, I had to kind of start with the tension and then hopefully resolve it.
We think it's very modern and very nice, very well explained in a few words, the dilemma of what goes on and what's available. So it's very nicely presented.
Thank you. I'm glad you say that. Okay. So I guess now I'm moving into the apology phase. I now want to emphasize that I'm not saying one form of religion or religious experience should exist and the other should not. Rather, I'm attempting to highlight this tension between the two modes which has played itself out over the course of thousands of years, and to ask what the marriage of the two, if possible, may look like. Taking up the dialectic method of comparison and asking what is the synthesis of the antitheses is the important question. As we have seen previously, while these two modes of religious experience seem to be at odds, they are woven one into the existence of the other and rely upon one another. We cannot have the outer without the inner, so what might it look like to achieve a harmonization and symmetry between each? To put this question another way, how could each realm of experience be yoked together, and what would such a yoking be called? And, it might be interesting to just kind of talk about that for a second. I wonder if anybody has any comment that they would like to make, and if not, that's okay.
I wanted to bring up in response to both the tension and also what you're calling yoking, whether the term tethering would also apply, where
Sure.
You have like a rope. So one part is relatively speaking fixed and the other part is relatively speaking in motion. And then maybe they switch. So that's the kind of image that I'm having. I wonder how that relates to what you're talking about, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, completely. I'm perfectly fine with that language. I think they express a very similar, if not the same thing.
But the static and the motion also, would you say, or is it
I mean, I would side with that, although, you know, I can't speak authoritatively necessarily, but yeah, certainly. I mean, it seems to me like what I'm trying to say with this is that the inner is the nucleus of the outer. I mean,
Okay.
the whole outer experience of religion is based upon, you know, the religious experience of prophets, people like Mary or Moses or Ezekiel or what have you.
Yeah.
And, you know, I guess in the case of tethering, that outer experience would always be tethered and perhaps circumambulating the inner experience of religion.
I will offer two words that one is, of course, well known in the, and it's becoming in the Western world better known. In the Indian tradition has been used and explained in many ways. It's called tantra, and that is the dance of this union trying to become. It's always trying to become, and it is opposites, and it's also its complement. So both things are there. And as a more modern way of saying it, I would call it mutual awakening. So there's a mutual awakening that needs to take place because both are in it. And by both mutually awakening, then the dance can actually become the one.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up Eastern traditions, because I chose the word yoking very carefully because I was also thinking about the meaning of the word yoga as well, which I do believe means yoking. Am I right in saying that, or is that not correct?
That's probably one of the definitions, yes.
Okay.
Which has to do with that mutual awakening, and then there is each other's complement. So unless the complement is meeting, then there's no, the meeting is maybe the yoking, and one has to work at it. So maybe the word yoking also implies a type of hook or lacing on all of the different dances that take place before the completion is available.
Yeah, you know, I didn't want to include this in my presentation, but I figured maybe it would be something that I could talk about just very quickly. But, you know, there's a lot of ox or bull symbolism going on here with this concept of yoking. Also, the Hierophant card represents the astrological sign of Taurus, and you can see that over each of his shoulders, he has the horns of a bull. And I don't know any other astrological symbolism which gets at that point, but nonetheless, this has to do with Taurus and being a sign of the earth, of the outer invisible world. And you know, the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the letter of Aleph, and the pictograph associated with that is the ox. So it's this, you know, people tend to say that it has to do with the spirit and the spirit's evolution around this circle of the tarot, but it's really, in my way of thinking about it, it's this spiritual substance or whatever we want to call it that then descends down into this world. And then halfway through, you know, it needs some goading and some prodding, which is gets at the point that I will eventually make with this concept of yoking. But I kind of chose that to fit into this larger network of associations that have to do with an ox or a bull.
I will share also that in, let's say, Hindu traditions, which is one of the earliest, and from there it moves into the Tibetan Buddhists, and it moves on, that a lot of the facets of specific deity that may show up in different facets, they ride a vehicle. So they are riding a vehicle together in order to advance. And some of them have the bull or the bird, or like Garuda, the bird, or so it also means that the being rides on something, a vehicle in order to display, manifest that connectivity of mutual awakening. So that's where creation and form, Taurus rules form. So there is an actual vehicle that one rides. So the yoking is one way of saying, but riding is you ride it and you're actually yoking it because you're riding it.
Mhm.
So,
yeah, I mean, I think that the point, I could be wrong in this because, you know, I'm not working with oxen myself, but I think that the point of yoking two oxen together is so that you can ride them and neither one goes too far forward in front of the other. So that supplements that point as well.
There's a question in the YouTube chat that says, is cyanide, I think, the nickname of the person. But the question is the high priestess similar to the hermit? And if so, how? And then later writes, because she represents inner religion, and I'm drawing connections to the hermit card.
Yes, I'm looking at this YouTube chat now, and the same person also says Theresa of Avila wrote The Interior Castle,
Yeah.
which is a very happy coincidence. But I, you know, it would take me thinking about it for a little bit to give you any kind of rational answer, but intuitively, I want to say yes, of course they are related. Does anybody have anything to say about that other than myself?
I think that I also have a kind of a question that I think it relates to the hermit card as well. I thought about the high priestess being this. I'm actually thinking about if the high priestess was a person, if what would she think about the Hierophant as a person as well?
Yeah.
Because especially in that idea that the prophets are prophets because of their inner religion experiences that everyone has. But what is the difference between some and others, you know, and what it makes a real prophet? You know, because I think that in the idea of the high priestess that you brought, anyone can be kind of a prophet, right? And then
I think what I imagine with the high priestess, if I kind of follow you with this idea of what would she be like in the real world, or who would she be as a person, I kind of imagine that her spirituality is one more of silence, or just a quiet spirituality, and that she's maybe not writing books about it, or maybe not writing, you know, gospels about it, or founding entire religions on it, but it's there nonetheless. And that's why I put that there's like I don't remember the wording exactly, but the receptive and feminine experience of the womb-like temple in which the high priest is seated is one of knowing, individual experience, and personal access. And I think that most accurately puts how I feel about it, rather than it's more kind of like a quiet receptivity rather than an active evangelizing.
Yeah, but I also believe that the Hierophant card, I don't think that his problem is being a prophet himself, but I think it's something else. It's the institution and not.
Oh yeah, I completely agree to that end. I if we also continue with this idea of how would these people interact, it seems to me like the Hierophant would be on one side of the room, like, who's this crazy chick over here? And the high priestess would be like, this guy's nuts too. And the prophets would be in the middle, like, all of you are crazy.
I'll try to answer the question that was posed on the chat. In my estimation, the high priestess, although she is accessing her inner world, she does have a scroll on her lap. And she is busy trying to reveal something and manifest it in writing or whatever. She's getting in touch in order to reveal something, or that either eliminates writings that have already been written, or to write something that may become. She's not the authority in the field. So, and the hermit is busy with the light. He's busy with connecting to the light, and he's less busy trying to write it or manifest it in some way at that moment. His quest is to embody that light that will give the perception a knife, a clarity that then he can take in his next step, whether it's law, whatever it is. But he is invested in having the clarity and the position and the connection to that. So that's how I find them to be connected but different.
Yeah. Yeah, very well put.
I also believe that both of these cards are related to knowledge and how you seek knowledge. The High Priestess, you will always be guided by your intuition, while the Hierophant will always have this need of seeking something that is outside ourselves, that probably someone that has more knowledge than us. But I think it also correlates to religion as well, or to any religious experiences as well.
Yeah.
Well, I will also add that the first cards, before you get to the Hierophant, and we mentioned it last time, are personal cards. There's no one. There's the Fool himself. There is the Magician, and there's the High Priestess, and there's the Emperor. They're all by themselves ruling. By the time you get to card number 5, you can no longer be you by yourself. You are now required to deal with the collective that's coming at you. So you need to interact with the outer world in some way. It is a shifting, pivoting. I called it a pivot point, because it's not just a step of inner realization, but it is an actual shift that now needs to address others and the outer world, besides addressing his development. So now is that the mutual awakening, tantrism begins to happen with the outer world and the inner world. It begins here, and you can see that he's got 2 people in front, where the other ones don't necessarily have anyone around, facing them or relating to them in this deck at least.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear from some people on this topic, but I kind of just have this. I imagine that for a lot of people, your sense of religion kind of begins with a person like this. When you're young, perhaps you have your priest or your preacher, your minister, etc., that perhaps opens the door to that world for you. And then, maybe once you get older and have your own thoughts and kind of separate yourself from the parental world, maybe then you have your own religious inclinations. But it seems very much like, he is probably the starting point and probably the introduction for a lot of people to the religious world and religious life. Which again, I don't want to say that I'm completely poo-pooing on the Hierophant, but
with others. At this point, he's with others, besides being with himself. Now he needs to be with other. So that's the beginning of other showing up. It's like the mystic who's in the cave or developing, and all of a sudden, guess what? Now it's time to go out and face the music. So music meaning laws and all of the things that he represents that are in the establishment. So he has to deal with himself and others, and there they are in front of him.
Well, again, it's really interesting that you mentioned the establishment and laws, or the establishment of laws, because if we go backwards and we see that the High Priestess holding the scroll of the Torah, Torah translated literally means law. And what I was trying to pick up on with that was saying that this experience of this card is the foundation of law, but it's like the inner corollary to outer law, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, she's trying to reveal it. She's trying to bring it into the book so it becomes a law. So
this relates to something that I was thinking of what you were just saying about the card and about religion and how it's how we're exposed to it as we grow up. For me, having come from a home where there were many different religions that were present, my parents had completely different backgrounds, and also there were so many books. And the books ranged from Bibles to Herodotus to Velikovsky to, things like Hermann Hesse, or, books that were coming in to my life. So for me, it was in the books that I found the truths. So even if it was like a biography of Jose Marti, from Cuba, that was a place of finding truth. And then reading Renan's Life of Jesus was a way of finding truth. And reading Song of Solomon or reading Walt Whitman, right?
Yeah.
So it kept, the more you said, the more I kept thinking books. I mean, I'm biased because my life is books, but so books not only formed a lot of ways that I think, but they also became what I felt was sort of worthy of my energies, because the books are going to live past me. Some of the books, like a book that Gauguin made, and it was published in the 1800s, that I still have, that was in my childhood home. These are things that made me understand the value of the book, but also the value of what's contained within the book. Yeah. So when I come into tarot, and I think I'm the most novice of particularly our group that is sort of hung together from the whole year, I came really wanting to find out what it was. But anytime I've ever looked at a tarot deck, and even now with my new project that you suggested, Nick, of painting each card, right?
Yeah.
It's still a book. Each, the stack is, it's a version of a book. It's another, right? It's a loose book.
Yeah, I think each tarot card is certainly always a book that is continually writing and rewriting itself, certainly.
Right. And then each card is a page of another much bigger book.
Yeah.
And of course, also I came into this class because of Jung, because of the Red Book. And so there's a book too, which has the archetypes represented, yet more direct or indirect way, I don't even know. But anyway, there's a parallel. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's supportive of what I would now say as a fact that we're clearly dealing with archetypal images, and they're endless. They continually are unpacking themselves, which is, really powerful. But also it's interesting to me, one thing that I struggle with, or have struggled with, and probably will continue to struggle with, is that, when you're presented with such a wide array of books, and, I think it's probably true for all of us that we're avid readers and consumers of different kinds of thought, that at some point I know I reach a point within myself where I have to ask myself, like, okay, how do I bring all of this together into something that's meaningful, rather than having all of these disparate but still meaningful philosophies and religions and all this stuff. And that, to me, is kind of how I would relate the experience of the High Priestess, because it's like, how can I fill into what's right for me? How can I align my values with all of these external objects in the form of books?
Well, and then again, here we can bring the Hermit. He's been through the book and the various things, and all of a sudden he realizes that he needs the light in order to make that book happen. or however the expression. So the texts come alive and the text can also hide. So it is in the connection to reveal the next step that you can make a difference here. She's revealing the book, and the hermit is revealing the light, where the information comes through and downloads into the book.
Okay, let's go forward here. Okay, so I've already read this, so now we will move to what I am imagining is a resolve or the synthesis for this tension and opposition. Okay, so the synthesis as justice. Every aspect of this card, save the sword, deals with harmony, symmetry, and complementarity. The figure in the justice card is again seated in a temple, which we cannot discern whether of this world or another. The sword, an instrument of cleavage and discrimination, here represents the ability to discern and not be fooled by mere appearances of the external world, but to know that they have their forms and images in an unchanging and undying world. Clearly, I'm trying to drive at some Platonic point here, which is to not be fooled for the shadows on the wall of the cave, but for the actual images themselves. Okay, the opposites which previously seemed irreconcilable, the inner and the outer modes of religion, subject and object, the female priestess and the male hierophant, the visible world and the intelligible world, and so on, are now brought together under one mantle. Just as the pans of the scales are in balance, the colors in the card are oppositional but complementary, and even the number of the card 11 is another symbol of balance and harmony. So too are the opposites of inner religion and outer religion harmonized and recognize their reliance on one another. They are ultimately two sides of the same coin and give rise to one another. The high priestess justifies the existence of the Hierophant. Okay, and then a few words from our good friend Plato. Okay, so this is Plato on the topic of justice. Justice in the life and conduct of the state is only possible as first it resides in the hearts and souls of the citizens. So what I take from that is that, you can't achieve justice outside of yourself, and you could interchange, I think, religion, religious value, whatever, with justice in this case, if you have not achieved that within yourself. Okay, and again, justice in the individual is now defined analogously to justice in the state. So there's that whole subject, object, inner, outer being brought together here. The individual is wise and brave, external values, in virtue of his reason and spirit, respectively, internal phenomena. He is disciplined when spirit and appetite are in proper subordination to reason. He is just in virtue of the harmony which exists when all three elements of the mind perform their proper function and so achieve their proper fulfillment. He is unjust when no such harmony exists. Okay, so now to the yoker and the yoked. So clearly we've got two oxen in the centerpiece here, and then the two cards which we've talked about up to this point, which are antithetical to one another, and then the card which brings it all together, the one who yokes. And again, the numerological method of comparison that I was using for this is that, 11 then reduces to 2. So there's clearly a relationship not only between the Hierophant and the High Priestess, both being in a temple, as well as justice, but also 1 and 1 reducing to 2 gives you the relationship between High Priestess and justice.
And the 5?
What of it?
Well, the numerology that you are connecting the 5 with the other 2.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up, Gilda. It doesn't work for that one. No, I'm just kidding. But yes, I mean, it clearly doesn't. There's no reduction that makes that possible. But I was just saying, it seems like they're all in a temple of sorts as well. So that's how I've got these 3 lumped together.
He's got the crown with the 3 levels. So he is embodying the reason you're talking about. He has it on his head, the 3 layers. So in that way, I suppose there's a connection. Yeah. Yeah,
the threefold. What is that called that he's wearing?
The crown of the. I don't know. It's the crown that has the 3 levels of realization. Maybe the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, or
Does it not look like an egg as well?
Yeah, like a beehive or something. Like a beehive. Yeah.
I feel like I remember reading something about the hat. I can't remember the name for it, but it's something that kind of gets at the symbolism of being yoked as well, and having to do with an egg and yoga and union and all of that stuff. But it's interesting also that in this quote, we've got, he is just in virtue of the harmony which exists when all 3 elements of the mind perform.
Yeah, so that's how I connected. But also when this is a very mercurial connectivity, because when everything is subordinate to reason, unless there is a well-developed everything, then reason can run its own and never achieve any real integration, as we well know. So mercurial correspondence needs to be embodied integrally in order to be that, to command that authority of the 3. And I have met people who don't have a mind. They don't reason. They channel everything from cosmic awareness, and the body has an intelligence of its own. So here, in my estimation, it's pointing out the mercurial connection of developing the intellect and the reason as intellect, which at the time when it was created was perhaps something that was becoming developed. But I would say that in our time has been overly developed, while the rest of it has been underdeveloped. And that's where it needs to somehow come up and meet the advancement that mercurial reason has already achieved in our lifetime. Yet the embodiment of feeling, sensing, and intuition and channeling cosmic source and all the different intelligences have been set aside in order to evolve just the reason quality.
Okay, all right. I mean, to be frank, you kind of lost me there, but I'm going to assume that you know what you're talking about and move forward. So the next couple of slides, I just have to warn you, they may be a little controversial, as if this whole thing has not already been somewhat controversial. And I may implicate you in a heresy or two, so just be warned. Okay, so spiritual, not religious. Sure, we've all heard that one before. Okay, so it is rather interesting to me how pervasive a sentiment this is. I believe this sentiment is woven into the heart of the issue and the presentation tonight. As much as I do not presume to speak for anyone other than myself, I speculate and observe that many of those who claim to be spiritual, not religious, mean something very similar to what I have attempted to highlight with the inner religion, outer religion dichotomy in tonight's presentation. I also observe that most of the people, myself included, which claim to be spiritual, not religious, are actually the most religious people I know of. They are not in church, but wrestle with religious questions incessantly. At what point are they then considered overtly religious? At the heart, the interiority of many of my issues and the issues, quandaries, and questions of many modern individuals is a fundamentally religious question. The widespread disavowal of religion, too, seems to have more to do with the rules and archaic regulations put forth by appendages of the state in the form of the church, and not of a true religious or spiritual experience. To all those who claim to be spiritual, not religious, I would pose the question, from whence does the spirit and your spirituality come? So, yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to kind of have some conversation around this because, you know, this is not where I intended to go with this, but I couldn't pull my mind out of this question once I kind of set up these two cards, because I often wonder why that's, again, such a pervasive sentiment. I mean, I've said it myself and I've heard so many other people say it, and also kind of a point of personal reckoning for me has been realizing that so many of the questions and endeavors that I undertake are fundamentally of a religious nature. So I'm both asking the question to myself, but also to anybody else who's willing to take a crack at it. You know, at what point should I just then consider myself extremely religious?
No, I would like to make a comment about this.
Please do.
Okay. In ancient time, really ancient times, prehistorical times, there was the worship of the woman. And one of the oldest figures found was the Venus of Willendorf.
Right.
I don't know, maybe 30 or 40,000 years ago. And it was a small figure that one would hold in their hand, but there were many similar objects like this. It was the feminine, and it was a fertility figure for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a strong emphasis in early religion on fertility. So both in the, you know, having more children, and also your crops and your cattle and so forth. So that seems to not be the way anymore as much as it was. So the shift went away from the worship of the woman, and that it's my understanding that the Venus of Willendorf was actually worshipped. I can't, you know, nobody was there, so we don't know. So the shift went from the focus on the woman as the person who brings life, or the female bringing life. And then when it became more about land and power, the shift went to the male. And I don't mean to be favoring one or the other. I think we need both. We need the combination. But I think there's a huge shift to where the male has the power. And so when the religion became more organized and buildings were built and churches and temples were created, the power went for the most part to the men. And the women were relegated to staying at home, raising the children and taking care of the household. But the actual shift in power went to the men. And I think it's important to be aware of this. And I wonder if other people think other people agree or disagree with this.
Well, I certainly do not disagree. I would tend to put it in terms of, you know, we let the male ox get in front of the female ox, and they're not yoked together, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, anybody, please feel free to comment or jump right in.
Well, I think when you're saying the ox, you can't have one without the other.
Right, of course.
You need to have two to be in balance. And now, with the way people are talking, it might be there are more than two. And that's coming into the conversation as well. So we need to be more, I would say, more inclusive, so that everybody has a voice. I think that's very important for people to have a voice and to see themselves portrayed as symbols of where religion is going or where leadership is going.
Yeah, and certainly it seems to me like the exclusivity or exceptionalism of certain religions is, again, something that people react to and seek to kind of disavow, which I think is going alongside of what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think that both of these cards are not infighting. I mean, if we think of both of them talking, I think they would agree in most of the things, because I think that most of the problem is external from both of them, and but the idea of where comes the spirit in your spirituality, I think that probably it came from a Hierophant perspective at first, because I think we all have this encounter with religion at first, with an Hierophant, with an institution. I don't remember anymore at a time when I was really, really young of not connecting God to a church, to an institution. So, and then later on, I was aware of the High Priestess perspective, so I think they're just combined, even though my spirituality may not be a religious form of some sort. It still came from a little bits and pieces of a Hierophant perspective, because I think that just, if you go if you go through life in a more instinctive way or intuitive way, both of them will always be kind of intertwined. They'll not be separated. You always work with both, even though you're not even realizing that you are working with both.
Yeah, I mean, I am certainly in agreement with you, and I think that I'm just bringing up this question because it seems like these two experiences play themselves out as opposed to one another. But I rather just think of them as the right and left hand of God, that just, they're ultimately two wings of the same bird, two sides of the same coin, however you want to say it, and they belong to one another. But yet we tend to view them as they're opposed to one another and separate. And the spiritual, not religious thing is always, to be frank, kind of irked me a little bit, because what I was trying to get at with this thing, from whence does the spirit and your spirituality come? It almost seems to me like a sentiment that kind of sidesteps religion in a certain sense, which I understand, and have certainly done that myself. But at the same time, I think they're very much the same thing. I mean, if you have a belief in something such as a spirit, I mean, that's ultimately a religious belief.
I'll share that I think religion comes from religio, which means to link back, or which is also what you brought before, to yoke. And so this is, the problem is that the word religion throughout the ages is quite loaded. It is so loaded that people just cannot go there without having all the paraphernalia that is the long tail that's attached to it. So because that is there and is embedded in the establishment, in the church itself, is embedded in everywhere, that for them to leave that, and in order to get in touch with their sacredness, their inner sacred religion, it becomes very difficult, because the religion that is an establishment has in many ways not offered the people the cream of the contact to their inner self. but it has been in many ways a way of the many things, political, this, that, the other thing. So it is that connectivity authentic, or is it just a facet of civilization that's being utilized for something other than the sacred connection that one carries inside? So that may be why the word, people may say, well, I'm spiritual, but not religious. Yeah. It's the same thing, but I was speaking about nun. For example, there's a nunnery that in the state where I'm in Vermont, Tibetan, and they were calling it, trying to find the name, and I suggested not to call it a nunnery. Why? Because what female wants to go into a nunnery? Why? Because the word, it has a long history. So, for example, if you call it the Dakini or something else, then the goddess is present. There's a goddess, and it doesn't have a tale of civilization abuse or control or all of the things that we all know about. And so it is a matter of words meeting a new light and not being charged with a tale from thousands of years.
Yeah, and I certainly understand that, and I still, it was kind of a calculated move to use the word religion, even though I know that it's a very charged word for a lot of people, myself included. My relationship to religion is riddled with a lot of pain and difficulty and unanswered questions. So, I'm saying this back to myself as much as I'm saying it to anyone else. But I guess also for me, I am wanting to think, how can I reclaim the word to mean something different, or to mean what it truly means, rather than meaning a dogma or a religious organization or the church body, rather a religious attitude or something like that. So I still have some more stuff to get through. I don't know if anybody has any comments. If you do, that's perfectly fine.
There's some questions in the YouTube chat.
Okay. Yeah.
The first one said earlier, is Earth synonymous with church? And then it goes like, Jesus never found a church on Earth, and I think his plan was connected to heaven, was to connect heaven and earth. I just think church is too vague to be only a man-made building. And then just in case said, spirit or consciousness is what gives meaning to life. What would be the point if we were mere flesh machines, unaware of our own or any existence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ultimately, when you start talking about spirit and soul, anima, animate, that kind of thing, language becomes tricky because it depends on kind of what system you're talking about. But, since I've quoted Plato and we've been talking about Greek words and stuff, we could stick with soul. And, the argument within Plato's dialogues is that the soul is the thing that, makes the kind of mere flesh animate. It's the thing that, I don't know if I can say it any better way than it animates life. So yeah, completely agree with you, and several other people clearly also agree with that. But I would say on the topic of is Mary or the church synonymous with earth, I think that's kind of the exoteric understanding. And that's not to say that it's false, but Mary has always been talked about as if she were the church itself, which receives the Spirit of Christ into itself. But actually, the slides that I have set up following this one kind of take up that question. So let's get through these and let's see if it does anything for your question. And if not, then we can walk around it some more. So this is going to be kind of wordy, so I'm just going to get through this quickly, and then we can go back on it and talk about the points. So I wanted to to get into a Gnostic gospel called the Gospel of Mary, since, Mary has been the topic of discussion for so much of tonight. So let me take a drink and then we will get through this. Okay, so it is true of both Gnosticism and Christianity that Mary, the high priestess, or who I think of as the high priestess, was said to be the best disciple of Jesus and the one who best understood his teachings. In this gospel, Jesus appears to Mary in a vision unveiling his teachings to her, which she then must teach and model to the male disciples. The quotations below are from this gospel and follow in order the unfoldment of Jesus' teaching to Mary. So if you want to seek out this gospel for yourself, you can find it in the Nag Hammadi library under the title Gospel of Mary. And sadly, it's only a fragment. Portions of it are missing and probably will never be recovered, but the gist is there. Okay, so in the section titled The Savior's Farewell, and this is Mary speaking, I believe, in the first part. Yeah, okay, so when the blessed, or no, this is an account of the Savior's farewell. So when the Blessed One had said these things, he greeted them all. Peace be with you, he said. Acquire my peace within yourselves. Be on your guard so that no one deceives you, saying, look over here or look over there, for the child of humanity exists within you. Go then, preach the good news, which in Greek apparently is evangelion, which is where we get the word evangelize. So go then, preach the good news about the kingdom. Do not lay down any rule beyond what I determined for you, nor promulgate law like the lawgiver, or else you might be dominated by it. So again, it was just really interesting to me when I was making this presentation tonight to think back on these passages and how pretty much everything that I included in this presentation is in this quote, where he says, acquire my peace within yourselves. Do not be deceived by people saying, look over here in the external world, look over there in the external world. And then again, do not lay down any rule or dogma beyond what I've determined for you. Okay, so Mary then proceeds to comfort the disciples. Peter asks Mary to teach. Peter said to Mary, Sister, we know that the Savior loved you more than all other women. Tell us the words of the Savior that you remember, the things you know that we don't because we haven't heard them. Mary responded, I will teach you about what is hidden, veiled, just as a veil hangs behind the high priestess, from you. And she began to speak these words to them. Mary then discusses vision and mind. She said, I saw the Lord in a vision, and I said to him, Lord, I saw you today in a vision. He answered me, Blessed are you for not wavering at seeing me. For where the mind is, there is treasure. There is the treasure. For where the mind is, there is the treasure. I said to him, So now, Lord, does a person who sees a vision see it with the soul or with the spirit? The Savior answered, A person does not see with the soul or spirit. Rather, the mind, which exists between these two, and sees the vision. The Savior describes to Mary the soul's ascent through the realms of powers. The soul replied, saying, What binds me has been slain, and what surrounds me has been destroyed, and my desire has been brought to an end, and ignorance has died. In a world, I was set loose from a world, and in a type from a type that is above, and from the chain of forgetfulness which exists in time. From this hour on, for the time of the due season of the age, I will receive rest in silence. After Mary said these things, she was silent, since it was up to this point that the Savior had spoken to her. So, it's really, really profound to me that essentially everything that she's saying that Jesus apparently revealed to her can also be found in Plato. I mean, literally all of this. And it's also really profound that she's having the soul's ascent from the body through the realms of power described to her, but also as she's describing this to the disciples, she's modeling that for them. Okay, so, and this is the last one, the last slide. The disciples dispute over Mary's teaching. Peter responded, bringing up similar concerns. He questioned them about the Savior. Did he then speak with a woman in private without our knowing about it? Are we to turn around and listen to her? Did he choose her over us? Then Mary wept and said to Peter, my brother Peter, what are you imagining? Do you think that I have thought up these things by myself in my heart, or that I am telling lies about the Savior? Levi answered, speaking to Peter, Peter, you have always been a wrathful person. Now I see you contending against the woman like the adversaries. For if the Savior made her worthy, who are you then for your part to reject her? Assuredly, the Savior's knowledge of her is completely reliable. That is why he loved her more than us. So I included all of this because clearly the people who wrote these Gospels thought that Mary played a very, very high role in this divine drama. And the male disciples were second to that. And they were clearly pretty up in arms about it. So we can talk more about that as it relates to these cards, but let me finish with these last quotations. So now from the Gospel of Thomas, Logion 38 through 39. And I also just want to preface this with saying, Jesus was known throughout the Bible and throughout his time apparently to reveal the meaning of his parables to his disciples, but not to other people. So Jesus said, the Pharisees and scholars have taken the keys of knowledge and hidden them. They have not entered, nor have they allowed those who want to enter to do so. As for you, be as shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. And then Logion 102, Jesus said, woe to the Pharisees, for they are like a dog sleeping in the cattle manger, where it does not eat or let the cattle eat. Pharisees are very much like hierophants. Those are my words. Finally, Logion 22, Jesus said, when you make the two into the one, when you make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, and when you make the male and the female into a single one, so that the male will not be male, nor the female be female, when you make eyes in place of an eye, a hand in place of a hand, a foot in place of a foot, an image in place of an image, then you will enter into the kingdom. Okay, so just to conclude quickly, I included these passages from Gnostic Gospels because in them we are presented with a very different view of the inner experience of religion, the role of Mary Magdalene and her modeling of the role of Mary Magdalene and her modeling of the soul's ascent, the tension between Mary, the female disciple and best student of Jesus, and his male disciples, Jesus' condemnation of Pharisaical secrecy and reservation of religious meaning, Jesus' condemnation of religious affiliation with law and state, and the need for bringing these opposites together before entering the kingdom and having peace. It is also worthy of note that the teachings of Jesus and the Gnostics are strangely similar with those of Plato, Plotinus, and other Neoplatonists. Additionally, the Gnostics were known to read Plato, and fragments of Plato's works have been recovered alongside Gnostic fragments, showing they were not disparate systems at all. So that's all that I have prepared, but it would be kind of interesting to double back on this whole Gospel of Mary idea, because to me, the tension between Mary and the male disciples is very similar to the tension between the inner, perhaps feminine and receptive experience of religion as pictured by the High Priestess, and the outer external kind of masculine experience of religion as pictured in the Hierophant card. So I wonder if anybody has any comment on that note.
There's a question for you in the YouTube chat. Samantha has a question for you.
Okay, what's up?
What does be as shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves mean to you?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with discernment, because shrewd means somebody who, more or less is unabashedly truthful, and really kind of speaks their mind, for better or for worse, I suppose. And innocent as doves, I think it's kind of paradoxical, where he's saying, be wise, because doves are the animal of Sophia, and also be shrewd, be somewhat cunning in your affairs with these Pharisees and scholars. Don't be fooled by the appearances which they put on.
I'll add to that the snakes represent their intelligence or the steeliness of reason, and the doves can also represent the heart. So in the meaning, it's trying to say when both are married, if both are there, then there is a movement that can take place. But being all heart without intelligence and being all intelligence without heart, both will be missing and will not be able to bring that togetherness into the next step that's whole.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to say, that's kind of the meaning for me, and how I attempt to relate that to my personal life. But it's also worth just pointing out that in the Gnostic worldview or their cosmology, since it's essentially Platonic or Neoplatonic, they have a view in which Sophia, or wisdom, where we get philo, Sophir, or philosophy, from love of wisdom, is very much a god or a goddess to the Gnostics, and mind, or nous, was also a god to the Gnostics that they would worship under the guise of nos or nous. So be shrewd as snakes means, use your mind, and innocent as doves means, also aspire to Sophia. If that makes any sense, I don't know.
I will also say that wisdom in it means to me that at the point where the next step needs to be taken, the person is integrally connected and whole, and it is shown what the next step is. It is at one with that. So whether, and that is wisdom, whereas intelligence and reason has an agenda of distilling an information that's only present through the mind, and using the heart only, as I was trying to say, then is emotionally charged and is not, doesn't have the connection to the intelligence to make discernment available, which is what creates wisdom. The wholeness, the integral of the two, tantric again, or mutual awakening, then gives you the wisdom to take the next step at that moment. It has nothing to do with what has been written or who says, or be distracted, or what. It has to do with the inner connection that avails the person to then make the next step, knowing that this is the next step. It can't, it's not doubting, it knows that this is the next step.
Yeah, to also just pick up on this shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves, if we double back on this line where Mary is asking about the nature of vision, this whole section in the Gospel of Mary is under the heading, Mary discusses vision and mind. And she's detailing an experience where she had a vision, and she then asked Jesus, so now, Lord, does a person who sees a vision see it with the soul or with the spirit? And the Savior answered, a person does not see with the soul or spirit, rather the mind, which exists between these two and sees the vision. So again, you could put rather the nous, which was worshipped under the image of a snake. So I imagine those two things are connected. And that's also why I paired these two different gospels in Gnosticism. I mean, these are two different texts, but they seem to be, again, conveying a very similar thing. So that's it for my presentation. Of course, we can just continue to have some open-ended conversation, but I have said a lot, and I would love to hear from anybody else in the chat or in the group.
There's a few questions in YouTube, but I don't know if anyone wants to make a question earlier.
Yeah. Well, if you're asking if anybody wants to take up the questions in the chat, I say let's get through them.
There's a lot of not a lot, but Assad Al-Din made a question earlier that I forgot to pass it on. Sorry.
Okay.
But here it is. Couldn't everyone and their mom just claim prophethood if there wasn't some kind of criteria or test that prophets demonstrate their authenticity by? And like signs and miracles, prophets having a direct connection with the divine, whereas the followers don't hear prophetic messages.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the criteria exactly is for being a prophet, but I would say that, yeah, it's probably true that everybody could be, in some sense, maybe by what I've said tonight, considered a prophet. But I think what really separates the wheat from the chaff in that sense is, does the revelation of the prophet have meaning? Is it something that, really brings some truth forward for people, rather than just being any Joe Schmo claiming to be a guru or a prophet or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think this question came right before I said that perhaps in the High Priestess way of dealing with the inner religion experience may be perceived as everyone being their own prophet, and then I think that it's more about the concept of prophet itself, whereas where it lays on both of the cards.
Yeah. Well, the thing that, I almost think of Socrates and Plato both as prophets in their own right as well. And, that I think that kind of throws a wrench in a lot of the conventional definitions of a prophet at the same time, because, Socrates' whole bent is like, look, I don't know anything, and you should probably realize that you don't know that much either, which is a really great starting point for self-knowledge. But, he's not espousing any teaching that he's like, you should come follow me because I'm a prophet and here's my whole system of belief. So in some sense, I kind of, I don't know if this aligns with the definition of a prophet, but when I think of a prophet, I think of someone who kind of wakes people up.
Yeah.
And I think there's also something that to consider if everyone is a prophet between being and doing. So being, the person might be a prophet unto its own self. And then doing is, well, what are you doing about it? Or if you are at all. And it just might be that because you carry that, others are attracted and they want to know. So there's also that relationship, which then allows some connection to take place versus the other way around. I am a prophet and I'm going out and tell people that I am a prophet. So being and doing are something that we all wrestle with and might show some light into that prophethood.
Yeah, I don't know if this clears things up or makes things even more murky, but I'm also thinking about the Oracle of Apollo and Pythia and how she was involved in prophecy, which is prophecy, prophet. So that seems to be kind of another aspect of being a prophet, which is probably different from the biblical interpretation of prophets and prophecy.
Samantha said in the chat that I think prophet has to be witness it. And their miracles must be a part of a shared reality. And then Asad al-Din said, I agree with that. I agree, and that makes sense. I wonder if it diminishes the significance of major known prophets, or if it's more of an uplifting of the common everyday profane man. And just one more. Cyanide had one question earlier that she said, would the snake represent the Hierophant and the dove represent the High Priestess?
I don't think so exactly, but I have no better answer. Let me think on it a little bit. In the Empress card with the deck that I use, there is a dove. There's a dove on the pillow of which the Empress holds, which is different from the Rider-Waite deck. It's one of the cards that uses some different symbolism. And then, the Hebrew letter that's associated with the Strength card, which is the letter Teth or Tet, has its pictograph as a snake. So I don't know if that fits with what we're saying. And I think it's probably a case of them trying to play over too many different systems that overlap, but not exactly. Yeah. I see also Cyanide said is Elon Musk a modern day prophet? And I don't know. That's kind of a funny question.
Well, I don't think so.
I can't verify that or do that.
Because he's just a capitalist, but if we believe that money is a new trace of religion as an institution, then yeah, probably, unfortunately.
But we don't know what it may bring, especially, let's say, the projects where you go under the earth and start caving in and doing all sorts of things. You never know how the earth is going to respond to all that. Making tunnels under the earth across, a country and so on. The earth has its limits.
Yeah, I don't think that from the Gospel of Mary, and from something that Marilyn said earlier, I wrote it down here in my notes that when she was talking about the ancient goddesses, I wrote it down that the female was the bringer of life, while the male perspective was the protector of property and not life itself. Male perspective was always dominant in protecting a construct, perhaps, and while the female side was always a protector of possibility, perhaps, of life itself, or just giving birth. I think that somehow this is closely related to the Gospel of Mary, because there are arguments about where she was, it was more about, for me, like, who was she, in a scale of things? Who is Mary amongst all of us? I think that was more of an perhaps ego discussion than an actual spiritual discussion of anything, I think.
You mean
I'd
our discussion, or within the text, right?
The text of Gospel of Mary.
Yeah. I mean, I just picked certain, that was not the whole thing. I just picked certain passages which I felt kind of threw some light on what we were talking about tonight. But I mean, yeah, it's certainly true. It's just like, they're talking about like some divine revelation and the unfolding of this great teaching. And it's like the disciples are just like, why didn't he choose me? I'm a guy.
I wanted to comment on that. I'm glad that this came up. I'm not Christian, so I didn't have the Christian upbringing and understanding that this discussion had. So when I heard about Mary, I thought it was Jesus's mother, because I know that in many areas, his mother is considered to be a god almost. So I was thinking, well, his mother was with him. What was wrong? His mother was with him, and he spoke to his mother. And then when I heard it was the other Mary, I did a double take, because I got very confused. I didn't realize there were these two. I knew that there were these two Marys, but I didn't realize the significance of what they were saying until it was mentioned that it was the Mary that was not his mother. I don't know. Did anybody else have that sense?
I don't know. I wanted to just wait for Nick to
Okay, because what happens when you come in with knowledge, your whole construct is built on what you know. So I didn't have this deeper understanding. And I wonder if other people, if everybody else knows that it was that what the Gnostics are referring to.
When Nick was reading right now the Gospel of Mary, I thought it was Mary, the mother of Jesus. I'm not sure as well. I thought it was Jesus' mother.
So that you had the same thought.
Yeah. But now that you're talking, perhaps it was Mary Magdalene and not.
Yes.
But I'm not sure.
So did that surprise you that it was Mary Magdalene?
Thinking about her now, I'm not actually surprised, especially then thinking about how the other disciples were treating her. Because I think they would have more respect to Mary, the mother of Jesus, instead of Mary Magdalene.
And I also didn't hear the word mother anywhere, so it would have turned up somehow.
Nick.
So what happened? Well, in the second page, it was brought up. But what we're talking about, Nick, is that when you started to talk about Mary and the disciples, not being Christian, I didn't understand that it was Mary Magdalene, and I thought it was Mary, Christ's mother. And so I didn't understand why they were upset until later on at the second page that you read. It spoke about Mary Magdalene. Then I realized, oh, I have this whole thing wrong. So I was asking if anyone else had that same problem that I did of misinterpretation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I can provide you a correct interpretation completely, but I think if I understand this correctly, the Gnostics, which, were essentially a subsect of early Christianity, which was born out of the exact same teachings, but just took a different interpretation to the same writings, understood Mary to be the sister, the wife, and the mother of Christ. And she has this threefold nature. And, I don't know what to make of that, but I read most of the Gnostic stuff as being purely mythological. And in that sense, it's difficult to understand because it's a paradox, much like Christ was a man and also a God.
So when you're saying Mary herself is a Trinity, kind of.
That's my understanding of it in the context of Gnosticism. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to understand. Honestly, all of their writings are almost entirely paradoxical. It'd be really interesting for you to pick up. The book that I have is called the Nag Hammadi Scriptures, and it's just the collection of all the writings that were unearthed at Nag Hammadi in, I think, 1945 or something. And I mean, they're like, the writings are almost like meditations in and of themselves, just because you can't really read it rationally or logically. I mean, they're so paradoxical that it kind of takes you just reading it like poetry and letting the ideas make an impression on you. It's very strange stuff, but also very, very cool and interesting.
Nick, can you talk a little bit more about the three facets of Mary? She was the mother, the sister, and the wife.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's, I don't know that I can really talk much more about it. That's just really based on something that I've read in this, but I'll see if I can find it and say something more about it.
That is connected to what Marilyn said about the ancient goddesses. They were all like three perspectives as well: the novice, the mother, and the wise woman, the elder woman.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find the passage in here that I'm referencing. But ultimately, no, I can't say that I understand it completely or well enough to try to convey it to anyone else. And I honestly don't know if, like I said, I had to paint in very broad strokes with a lot of this presentation, and kind of the final couple of slides. I'm glad that we're discussing it, but I was hoping more to kind of leave people with a lot of open-ended questions and things to think about for themselves rather than things that I can answer myself.
I think you made a wonderful presentation, because there's a lot of things to think about, especially I think that the main idea for me now is that the female perspective always like translates into three different things inside one thing, and we're talking about every Monday night, especially about duality of energies and perspectives and realities, and then that we have to bring this duality into a third perspective to create like a trinity. But the passive energy, the female energy, always had the three perspectives within themselves. Even the Gnostic and the more ancient religions.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's also, what I hope to achieve with this dialectical method of comparison, which is a loose interpretation of Hegel's version of the dialectic, which strangely enough he based on the Holy Trinity. He tried to take theological concepts and then apply them to philosophy and make a philosophy. It's almost like he was reverse engineering Christian theology in a strange way. But anyways, the thing that's really kind of bugs me about a lot of modern philosophy, or at least the impression that I have, is like people cannot get over this whole subject object question and subjective and objective. And it's like, I understand that it's something that really needs to be parsed out and thought about extensively, but at the same time, it just seems like such a misgiving of so many modern philosophers to like only talk about this like Cartesian split. And I hope in all of this and talking about these two antithetical points and then always presenting a synthesis, that we can move beyond that subject object thing constantly. And there's a term, I think it's somewhat of a neologism, but a guy that I'm a big fan of, John Vervaeke, uses this term transjective, which bridges the gap between the subject and the object, or the subjective and objective. Obviously, it's a threefold thing as well. But that to me is, really helpful in thinking about all of this, because I hope in establishing that third point and everything, we can somewhat transcend or create this transjective thing.
Yeah, we will share that the subjective and objective dialectic it never ends. So
Yeah.
it continues on, whereas the third conjunction then actually allows a resolution. Like I think Skip may know, but I think someone asked Jung, well, what do you think about God? And then he said, I don't think, I know. So what does that mean? That means he's no longer doing the subjective objective thing. He has arrived at the place where there's a conjunction and a realization.
Yeah, I mean, Jung is a very, very interesting player in this whole unfoldment of subject and object, because, I have a friend, and also kind of somebody that I've worked with a little bit, that is pretty much a philosopher himself, but also a psychologist and a theologian, and he really likes to take up these kind of things. And so he likes to write about Jung's typology from kind of a philosophical perspective. And he talks about subject and object a lot, but he's helped me actually to see that there's kind of this dialectic in Jung's approach to typology that's really interesting, where he's almost already trying to make that move to bridge the subject and the object in a dialectic. And also, it's really interesting how Jung also uses terms like the impersonal psyche or the objective psyche, which is like, what the heck does that mean? I get it intuitively, but it's like he's saying like psyche can be objective, which just throws a wrench in the way that we even talk about this stuff.
Well, it can be viewed from inwardly. When the eyes turn inwardly, it actually views. So that is what it views, is in some way objective, because it can then share, I had this view and it was this, and that. So then that makes it objective, but the eyes turn inwards.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge Samantha's comment here. She says, I think I know, and it's on the topic of the threefold nature of Mary. She says, Mary equals daughter of God, the Father, wife of the Spirit, and mother of Jesus, sister of the other disciples. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it sounds right to me. I would honestly need to think about that for a while, but I thank you for contributing that. All right, Skip, welcome back. It's 9:52. I guess we've got a little bit of time to work out. Is there anything you want to add?
Your microphone is off, Skip.
Okay, now we got it. Okay, I had it on my desk off and on the screen off. Yeah, well, when you start talking about the Trinity, you start you can get lost in wheels and wheels easily. And you know, that's, well,
I will say it was nested in a larger conversation, which we really
right,
kind of got into.
right. Okay, so what I'm going to say is that I have the book.
Oh,
and
righteous.
right. And so after Labor Day, the first Monday after Labor Day, not Labor Day, we'll start going through that. And I have read it cover to cover, as you can see. Whoops. I didn't mark it up quite as much as I normally mark up books, but I probably will. Before we get going, I think it's quite interesting that paragraph 11 is 2 pages long.
Yeah, there we go. That's Jung.
Yeah. So
What is the name of the book, please?
It's called 2 Essays on Analytical Psychology, and it's volume 7 of the collected works of C.G. Jung.
Thank you.
It is available on Amazon. You can probably get a used copy that you can mark up.
Is it the entire volume 7 or is included in volume 7?
No, it's we're talking about the whole of volume 7.
It might be the shortest volume in the collected works, though. It's like a little over 300 pages. So it's
Okay,
well, actually, I think volume 15 might be even shorter, but in any case, it has a lot of very good, interesting topics. It has psychoanalysis, the Eros theory, the other point of view, the will to power, the problem of the attitude type, the personal and collective or transpersonal and conscious, the synthetic and constructive method, the archetypes of the collective unconscious, general remarks on the therapeutic approach to the unconscious. Oh, that was only part 1. And then part 2, which I guess is a second essay, the relations between the ego and the unconscious.
Yeah, I've read that before. I haven't read the first half of it, but I've read the second half because the first Jung book that I got was called, it's part of the Viking Portable series, which is called the Portable Jung, but it's like a bunch of different essays, which are that one's in there.
Yeah, so this is the second essay, but part 1 is the effects of the unconscious upon consciousness. Then part 2 is individuation. And then there are appendices, the paths in psychology and structure of the unconscious. So I haven't read this in quite some time. It'll be interesting to see how I like it going forward. I did like it very much when I read it the first time, though. So Nick, did you get to everything you wanted to talk about today?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and more. This was a really fruitful discussion.
Good. And it looks like we have Samantha here and Justin is here, and Assad seems to be becoming very interested. So anyway,
is Jordan coming?
Yeah,
he's going to present, or
I don't know. What have you planned? Is he next week?
Yeah, the plan is for Jordan to give a presentation next week, and then Raquel the following week. I was hoping to touch base with Jordan tonight so we could just put that down in stone. He's going next week, but I assume that's still the case.
Yeah, he said so yesterday.
Okay, cool.
And you know, he was just prevented from being online today because of rain in Taos. Apparently that causes some problems, but I don't think they have rain very much in Taos. So
yeah, I don't think so.
well.
Also, I just want to mention, so you say that those dates are, I may be wrong on this, but I think the 9th and the 16th.
Yeah.
And then until the beginning of September, you're not going to be doing anything with this slot, but after that, you're going to take up.
Yeah.
With something else.
What I was thinking of, you know, if somebody wants to claim the slot, and here is a long message from Jordan.
Well, quickly before we get into that, I just want to say to Gilda, if you want to complete the cycle and go a second time on what will be the 21st, I think.
3rd, maybe.
Okay, yeah.
Oh.
If you want to do that, you're welcome to do that. I can show up and just do the administrative stuff, and you know.
Yeah, I can get you going.
I'll consider it.
Okay, yeah.
And meanwhile, you know, those 2 dates, 23rd and 30th, are going to be available. We won't have a session on the 6th of September. We'll honor Labor Day, and so we will have one on the 13th of September, which will be 2 essays on analytical psychology.
And that's going to be the first one.
That'll be the first one.
Here.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And I hope some of you will still come, even though it's not Tarot anymore. But in any case, pardon, go ahead, Gilda.
Well, I was just going to share that I've researched a little bit in the collective works. It's something that I have an interest in. It's quite interesting, actually. And I'm wondering if at any time anyone might take up doing finding this subject matter along Jung's collective works, and that is UFOs. It's quite interesting, and I have some books that refer to that, and that's really getting out there in par with artificial intelligence. And he talked about these things.
Certainly, if you would like to have a session on that, and you want to put it together for the end of this month, that would be good. I have read the entire UFO book that Jung wrote, which is 120 pages long. I forget what volume it is in, but it's in one of the volumes of the collected works as a part of it. But I think it could be in volume 10, but I'll have to check. But in any case, I have read it, so there is skip reading about Jung's writing on UFOs.
Yes, very interesting.
On the homepage of the YouTube channel, so you can easily find that.
Okay. Oh, good. I'll look it up. In the presentation on the 21st, if something dawns to me and I take it up, I will be addressing tarot.
Okay, well, that's fine.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yes, probably something.
Yeah, it's the 23rd is the date.
There's a deck that I really love, and it's actually kind of like an oracle, but not, and it's Northern European, and it's really very interesting and very deep and the sections are quite lovely. And
well, that would be cool.
Yeah. So for all those Northern European, the audience, they might.
Yeah, Justin and others. Yeah. That would be very interesting.
Yes, it's very interesting because I like it because contains archetypes and all of their stories, but there's an absolute separation and distinction in the way they organize it as to our more Western Rider deck and Golden Dawn that utilizes the more refined methods of sacred numerology and the Hebrew language and all of these other things. It has nothing, this is not there. So it's an interesting the way they put it together, and it's still quite, it will tell you more through archetypes what's going on and how to go about it, and the information that comes up. And I also, for example, enjoy that the images, they could be like one of them is a Black woman and the other one is when they're trying to point out something that you have to work on, it might be an elf, and so the shapes will also display what, and it's not so let's say ethnic. It's not. It's rather universal in the archetypes and the whole thing playing, and it's got males, females, everybody is there. So we like it because it shows, in my estimation, actually not much bias. So
if you're going to do that, please scan the deck or the key cards of the deck into a form that you can then share with us on the screen.
Yes, I send them to Nick. And then
I do just want to say that while I would, in theory, be happy to do that for you, I will have very limited time at that point at which you may make your presentation.
Oh, on the 21st?
Yeah, school will have started at that point for me, and I'm going to be very busy. So
yeah,
okay.
so Gilda, that's right. You can send them to me if.
Okay, because he kind of gave their color. I write the text. I write myself the text, and then I take a picture with the iPhone, and then that's the extent. And then I sent you that. But,
okay, well, let's take a look at it. Please don't send it to me 5 minutes before the session, though.
Okay, no, you let me know how much time you need.
Well, give me a week at least.
Okay,
give me a week at least. So.
All right, so then I'll be working on it so I can have it.
Yeah, by the time of Raquel's
I'll just choose a few, cards or something.
Right.
Nothing too busy because you don't have that much time.
And everybody should think about whether they want, links going out to their website or whatever for their business, especially. I know Raquel has a tarot business, and I know Jordan is interested in that also. So, because I don't want to deprive the audience of tarot learning, but I also want to take my 8 o'clock Monday nights back in the coming school year. So
yeah, if people also just want to send me money just for being a cool person, I'll set up a Patreon too, so you guys can just funnel money straight to me.
Okay, well,
no, I'm just kidding.
Nothing stops you from doing that. I know. I thought that would be a brilliant thing for me years ago, and so far I only have 22 followers on Patreon. And Tim, who is a world-renowned artist, only has 22 as well. So anyway.
Sounds like you're doing all right then.
Yeah, we're doing all right. But anyway, we have exciting things coming up in the coming year, and as Skip's robustness comes back, coming in September and after the hip replacement, You know, I should be totally retread by the first of the year, I hope.
Well, you're looking well.
Yeah, I'm feeling okay. It was a tough day today, but only 2 more weeks of it.
Good, good.
You don't want the gory details of how what makes it tough. I can tell you that. Marilyn seems to know what I'm talking about. So, anyway, is Assad here, or he went away, or what? I see him on the Zoom chat.
I'm not sure.
Huh?
I'm not sure. I think if you see him on the Zoom chat, I think those are questions that he put in the YouTube chat that Raquel then put into the Zoom chat.
Okay.
So, but I just need to say, guys, I am getting very tired and I need to put some groceries down my neck. So I'm going to check out and go have some food.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week for Jordan's presentation.
That sounds
Thank you
great.
all.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please double check with him by email.
Yeah, I will.
But I will.
Thank you, everyone.
I will also mention it on Sunday morning with him when I talk to him.
Great. I'll shoot him an email tomorrow and just double check. But thank you all and have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good night.
So Assad, welcome. Assalamu alaikum. We'll see you another time. And peace, Gilda. Take care.
Peace.